Okay, so are you ready to dive into this one? We're talking e-collars, specifically using them with dogs who love to chase. And we've got two really interesting research articles to dig into today.
Yeah, it's a hot topic for sure. And these studies bring some much needed data to the table, helping us look at how effective different training methods are.
Exactly. So we've got the Johnson and Wynne study
Hmm.
from this year that went head-to-head comparing e-collar training with a couple of different reward-based methods.
Right.
And then we've got the Cooper study from way back in 2014. And that one kind of takes a broader view by looking at how professional trainers with all their different approaches are tackling this whole chasing thing.
And one of the really interesting things that came out of the Johnson and Wynne study was that they actually found e-collars to be more effective than food rewards in stopping dogs from chasing a lure, at least in their experiment.
Really?
Yeah. Now, I know that's going to raise some eyebrows and we're going to break it all down, don't worry, but it just goes to show it's not always so cut and dry.
Yeah, there's always more to it, which is why we're here. So let's start with that Johnson and Wynne study. They had 30 dogs who were prone to chasing in the things. Broke them up into three groups: e-collar, fast lure reward, and slow lure reward.
Okay.
They put them through training and then really put them to the test.
Yeah.
And get this, all the dogs in that e-collar group, they stopped chasing the lure after just 1 or 2 sessions.
Wow.
And they even aced the first 3 tests.
That's pretty impressive. But context is so important in dog training, and this study really highlights that. And that's where that fourth and final test comes in.
Ooh, yeah. And that's where things get really, really interesting. We'll be back right after this quick break. All right, so we're back. And before the break, we were talking about that Johnson and Wynne study on e-collars and chasing, right, and how those dogs stopped chasing the lures so quickly. But then they did that fourth test.
Yeah, they switched up the environment for that last test. And what's really interesting is that 67% of the dogs in that e-collar group, they went right back to chasing the lure.
Oh, wow. So even though they had stopped chasing in all those other situations, something about that new environment made them, I don't know, forget what they learned. It makes you wonder how much of it is really about them understanding don't chase versus just learning to avoid a shock in those specific situations they were trained in.
That's a really good point. And it kind of shows you that while e-collars might be effective for like immediate results in certain situations, they don't necessarily help the dog understand that broader context of the behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like they haven't really learned the concept of never chase this lure, just don't chase it when we're in this particular spot.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Cooper study now. They took a little bit of a different approach with this one, focusing more on how professional trainers, with all their different methods, tackled this chasing behavior. They had 3 groups. One group trained with e-collars by professionals who use them regularly, another trained by professionals who don't usually use e-collars, and then a third group trained by reward-focused trainers.
Okay, so they really factored in the human element too, the trainer's own experience and the methods they prefer. What'd they find out?
Well, all 3 groups actually improved when it came to the chasing behavior, but the reward-focused group, they were faster at responding to commands, and a higher percentage of them would obey a command on the first try.
So you're saying those positive reinforcement techniques might actually help dogs learn more efficiently and reliably.
It's possible, and it just goes to show the potential benefits of those kinds of methods. Now, another thing the Cooper study looked at was cortisol levels. That stress hormone.
Oh yeah, stress and learning, that's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen. But what did they find out about the cortisol levels in this study?
So they found that the reward-focused group actually had higher levels of something called salivary cortisol, which basically indicates short-term stress.
Wait, so does that mean those reward-based training sessions were actually more stressful for the dogs than the other methods?
Not necessarily. The researchers were actually very careful to say that this shouldn't be interpreted as like purely negative stress.
How come?
Well, think about it. If a dog is feeling excited and engaged in a training session, or even if they're anticipating getting a reward, that can all trigger a temporary increase in cortisol, too.
So just because the cortisol levels are higher doesn't automatically mean it's bad stress.
Exactly. It all goes back to context, right? Just like with those mixed results from the e-collar group in that Johnson and Wynne study, we have to look at the big picture when we're interpreting these kinds of physiological responses, because there are so many things that can influence those cortisol levels.
It seems like there's always more to uncover. So we've really dug deep into these two studies and learned a lot about e-collars and chasing. But Where does this leave us? What should our listeners take away from all of this information? So we've really gone deep on these two studies today, looking at e-collars and whether they're the answer for dogs who like to chase. What's the main takeaway here?
You know, I think if anything, it just goes to show there are no easy answers in dog training. Both of these studies, the Johnson and Wynne and the Cooper one, they really show you that it all comes down to the details. So, the trainer's experience, how the individual dog is, the techniques, even just the environment can all make a difference.
Like you've been saying all along, context is key.
Yeah.
We can't just take the results from one study where, yeah, maybe the e-collar did stop the dog from chasing in that specific situation and say, okay, that means it's the answer for every dog who chases.
Exactly. And it's not just about whether it, quote unquote, works right. It's about what's best for that individual dog, how it affects them, how they learn, and if it's actually helping them in the long run.
So it's about the big picture, looking at the immediate results, but also thinking about what happens down the road for the dog. So for our listeners out there who are thinking about maybe using an e-collar with their dog, what's the most important thing to keep in mind?
Honestly, I would say do your homework. Don't just jump into it. Talk to a professional, especially someone certified in positive reinforcement training. They can help you figure out what's best for your dog and their specific situation.
Because every dog is different. And it sounds like training isn't just about stopping a behavior. It's about understanding your dog and how they learn.
For sure. It's about working together with your dog as a team.
This has been such a great deep dive. Thanks so much for joining me today and sharing your expertise.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Always happy to talk about dogs.
And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, happy training.